After the unfortunate death of Liz, I slid further and further into hopelessness. All the days started blending together, and I started fighting the strings less and less. I felt like I was both being dragged around physically by the strings, and mentally I just gave up fighting. Creole seemed to notice that as he tried to get some kind of reaction out of me. But I gave him no satisfaction at all with anything he tried. That seemed to annoy him at least, so I got that small victory. I might have fully surrendered to the strings if a familiar face hadn't shown up to the shop. When the rusty bell jingled, I didn't bother looking up from my staring contest with the voodoo template on the counter, until the sound of little feet running over to me tore me away from my exhilarating game. Little Olivia stared up at me with her sweet innocent little eyes. "Wow, you look like Mr. King Creole," she gasped. I had almost forgotten the girl and her new British mother. I looked at her, and the first smile in a couple of days came to my face. She returned my smile and looked over to her mother as she came over to me. Her look was one of sorrow as she looked at me, covering her mouth with her hands as she looked at me. I couldn't stop him. I sighed as I pointed to the strings, forcing me to stand. She reached out and held my hands in hers as she offered me some comfort. It felt nice to have someone touch me and not immediately hit me with a hard wooden cane. As if to further push that train of thought, King Creole emerged from his office, a big wide smile on his face. "Olivia, darling," he said with a big cheery grin, coming over as the little girl ran to him and wrapped her little arms around him. "Don't you worry, dear. I know what day it is today," he said with a soft chuckle, petting her head as he kneeled down to her level. She looked up at him flabbergasted. "You know today is my birthday?" she asked with a smile. The voodoo owner nodded and stood back up, looking over at me and Olivia's mother, a finger coming up and wagging at the two of us. Olivia's mother quickly dropped my hands and stood back. She feared the creature just as much as I did. He smiled when she was finally away from me, and turned his attention back to Olivia. "Of course I do. Now come along, darling. I've got the perfect present for you," Creole said, taking Olivia's hand and leading her to the office. Her mother followed after them, and soon enough left me alone once the office door was closed. Leaving me alone once again. Well, at least someone showed me some kindness. It felt really nice. The trio emerged from King Creole's office and chuckled as Olivia thanked him a million times for her gift-wrapped present. Smiling down at her and then over at me, his button eyes meeting mine, and he chuckled. "How about a story before y'all leave for your party?" he asked her, looking down at Olivia, who quickly nodded and jumped up and down, handing the gift to her mother and really just wanting to hear his story. "Travis, my boy, bring that rocking chair and your old stool over here," he ordered me. I nodded and brought the two chairs over, Creole taking the stool and Olivia climbing up onto the stool. "Once upon a time, there was a man named Charlie," he began, a soft chuckle leaving his lips as he looked up at me and Olivia's mother. We both looked away from his commanding gaze. Now, Charlie loved playing the piano. He wasn't very good at it at first, but he kept practicing and practicing. Day after day he played the same songs over and over just to get the movements down perfectly. And one day, he did it. He mastered the piano. The voodoo man smiled, lifting his fingers up and mimicking like he was playing the piano. "Wow, couldn't you just have wished to be better at the piano?" Olivia asked the storytelling voodoo man. He let out a howling laugh, causing me and Olivia's mother to flinch. "No, darling. My mama always said life can't be solved with a wish. You gotta roll up those sleeves of yours and get it yourself." Charlie knew that, and he never stopped practicing and getting better. He even started his very own band. He smiled, seeing Olivia with stars in her eyes. He smiled and continued. He even fell in love and got engaged. But life isn't always fair to hard-working people like Charlie. He sighed, leaning back in the rocking chair and letting it creak. "Now, I and you already know this story. We know who Charles Sumner was and who he became. I knew this very well in my futile attempt to stop my fate from happening. So why was Creole telling an abridged version to Olivia? Especially on her birthday of all days. The brutal murder of Charles Sumner isn't exactly the kind of children's story I would tell a kid. What happened to Charlie?" Olivia asked, now concern plastered all over her face as she scooched closer to the edge of the stool to look up at King Creole. The voodoo man's smile grew as he let the chair rock him back closer to Olivia. "Lol, Charlie won a contest. a contest that gave him a lot of money. He was gonna use that money to buy him and his fiancée a nice plot of land with a house on it. But Charlie's little lady friend was very naughty. She wanted that money all for herself, he said, his smile straining his stitched-up mouth as his rocking on the chair continued. She decided to get her secret boyfriend to steal the money from Charlie, so they could keep it all to themselves. At that line, my buttons instinctively drifted over to the basement door. Mary had been punished for her crime for close to 100 years at this point, and it seemed like there would be no end in sight for her. Who was that Greek myth guy? The one whose liver got eaten by that giant bird every day? Prometheus, I think. I guess that's what kind of punishment all King Creole dishes out. So, on the night he won the contest, Charlie was brought to a bar to celebrate and have a party with people he thought were his friends. Then, they took him out to the woods. The smile on the pale Voodoo store owner's face dropped a bit. Then they started beating him, saying all manner of horrible things to him. He'd scared, shaking his head and looking at Olivia, who was captivated by every word being spoken to her. Did they kill him? The little girl asked. Clearly, she was smarter than her years let on. She could tell where this story was going. Not right away. They beat him, and when they realized Charlie had gotten a very good look at all their faces, they picked up some sticks and stabbed them into Charlie's eyes. You cannot imagine the pain Charlie felt. His so-called friends hurting him this badly. Creole sighed, taking his top hat off and running his gloved hands through his messy black hair. Only the problem was, that didn't kill Charlie. Oh, he screamed and screamed. Anyone would if that happened to them. The people hurting him panicked again. What if someone heard that and would come? Creole quickly put his hat on and sat up straight as he looked at Olivia. Did someone come to save Charlie? The little girl asked, hugging the doll of her old mother that never left her side. I was also on the edge of my seat, even though I knew the outcome. What can I say? He's a good storyteller. No, nobody did. But they were so scared that they'd be seen and caught that they had to act fast. One of them grabbed a rusty saw from the back of one of their trucks. The others held Charlie down, shoving his face into the cold wet dirt. And they started cutting. Only, there was a problem. The saw was duller than they were. And I didn't cut well at all, he said. And that made sense. The cut to my neck that Creole gave me is nice and smooth. He did it with a nice sharp saw. His own cut, it's gagged and uneven in places. Like someone really forced it to be cut. How long did it take it to end? Olivia whimpered. Her mother came over to hug her from behind to calm her down. The little girl burying her face in her mother's dress, but still looking over at Creole. Obviously still fascinated by the story. Oh, it took a very long time, darling, Creole said. 30 minutes from when the saw started cutting to when Charlie's head fell off his shoulders. They covered his bodies under some leaves and sticks, and left him there, he said, holding his hands up, as if that was the end. But he continued, another smile spreading across his face. But they didn't account for his mama. I raised a brow at this. Creole never talked about his mother. It was something that sent him into a fury whenever me, and especially when Mary brought it up. But here he was telling a little girl all about his elusive mother. Me and Olivia's mother were obviously curious. Charlie's mama was very skilled in the arts of voodoo. She was loved by everyone for healing the sick and helping the needy. And when she learned that her son was missing, oh now she sprung into action. She found Charlie's body within a few days of him going missing. But she didn't report it to the police. Oh no. He'd scared, wagging his finger at all three of us. She took him straight back home, and she fixed him right up, bringing him back to the land of the living. Olivia gasped and started clapping in excitement, looking up at her mother like it was a miracle. Now, Charlie was very upset at what had happened to him. He worked so hard all his life, and he'd been taken advantage of. Well, he decided that it was his turn to have the fun. He chuckled, looking up at me with a smile. He made everyone who killed him suffer, especially his fiancée and her secret boyfriend. He hummed with a smile. If he'd done something this horrible to Mary, I can only imagine what he did to Henry, her secret mob boyfriend. Wow. What did Charlie do when he was done? Olivia asked, setting her doll on her lap and looking up at him for an answer. He smiled down at her and tousled her hair. Why, he decided to teach everyone the same lesson he learned. Taking the easy way only gets you punished. he said with a chuckle, looking over at me and Olivia's mother. Your new mommy learned that the hard way. Your new mommy left her family and moved to America to start a new life just for herself. Now, she's the best mother you could have ever asked for. He smiled, Olivia nodding back quickly and turning to hug her mother nice and tight. She looked over at me and nodded sadly. And what about him? What did he do to get turned like that? She asked, pointing at me, and then looking at Creel. I also looked at him, expecting some bullshit thing I had done to deserve this. What he said made me want to pull out the switchblade I've been hiding this whole time and just staple his fucking heart out. I was feeling selfish, he said with a giggle, standing up and walking past me as the strings tightened and forced me to stand in place while he said his goodbyes to Olivia and her mother. Both of them left the shop. He approached me and wrapped his arm around my stiff body. Travis, my good boy. Your parents called me once again. They're begging me to help them find you. I think they might even be coming over again. Who knows? If they ask for a wish, I just might grant it. He chuckled, grabbing my face and pulling it over to look at him. He smiled wide as he squished my cheeks. You wouldn't dare. I choked out, managing to fight off the string's influence enough to say that. That got a hard laugh out of him. He smacked me across my face and caused me to go limp against my will. He put his dress shoe on my face and put hard pressure on it. I wouldn't dare, he asked after laughing at me for a good while, putting even more pressure on my head. If you weren't my sweet little pet, I would have already gutted you like a fucking fish and used you for a voodoo doll. He hummed, reaching down and grabbing me by my hair and pulling me back up. Listen here. If you so much as try anything with Mary, I'll kill your parents right in front of you, he said with a smile, dropping me back on the floor and fixing his tie. I struggled to push myself up and looked up at him, gritting my teeth and trying to think of a way to fight back against him. And what I said is the reason I haven't posted an update in a while. Your mother would be fucking disappointed that this is what you're doing, I said, and instantly regretted it when he stopped in place and looked back at me, his teeth grinding hard as he came over to me, grabbing his cane from seemingly nowhere and starting to beat me with it. That was normal when he got pissed off, but this time he dragged me by the suit collar and dragged me down to the basement. You will not speak of my mother, he growled as he tossed me down to the floor of the basement and snapped his fingers. The strings on my body pulled tight as he had me suspended from the floor. I'll make sure that filthy mouth of yours is kept shut. He smiled as he produced a needle and thread. He stabbed my lips with it and sewed my mouth shut tight, and left me dangling from the ceiling for 2 straight days. Mary managed to cut the threads on my mouth with the porcelain shards that she always had near her. After he calmed down, he dragged me back up to the counter and shoved me to the counter, pointing a gloved finger at my face. The voodoo human doll that was King Creole delivered a threat to me that has left me chilled to the bone. You so much as speak out of line, and I will turn your parents into dolls and burn them right in front of you, he snarled, stepping away from me and letting his threat seep in. He means it, and he has the ability to do it. I need to stop him. I need to kill him.